This is the unrestricted free agent.
The Jimbo Fisher stuff. Were you in the room the other day when he threw?
I was. Part of the reason we had so much fun beating Clemson was because we used to talk a lot of shit to them and they couldn't handle it.
You feel fine, but your hands are shaking.
Coach Spurrier couldn't give a damn.
I want to take these athletes and mentor them.
Why can't the Gamecocks win at the SEC tournament?
So sunny all the time, so hot.
Too sunny.
Too sunny.
Fans are going to be fans, and people who understand the sport are going to talk sports.
With some weird dynamics.
It's going to be painful, but I think at the end of the day, we'll be stronger people for it.
Football season is almost here. Here we go. August 15th, 2022, Monday morning. Hope your week is off to a good start. We're off to a new chapter at my house, 2nd and 4th grade. Took the kids to school this morning. It's a good feel. Great energy. Didn't have to, well, the oldest got up. He's the one that doesn't, who's most verbal about not enjoying the school. He was ready to roll, even though he was saying he absolutely hated it, had no problems getting there, and was wanting to be the first one there. His younger brother did have to wake that guy up. He's not a morning guy, but worked out all right. Got him off to school. Now 2nd and 4th graders. Big weekend for me. Coach pitch, baseball, draft, the whole thing. So I feel like we're turning the page for sure. Gamecock football, first scrimmage, college football teams all over the country. Now really trying to figure out, all right, who can we count on? Who are we going to be able to throw out there and know what we're going to get? Who deserves playing time? A few injuries, few minor injuries popping up for Carolina, maybe making you raise your eyebrows over the weekend. Shane Beamer earning kudos again. It's the emotional attachment. I heard somebody describe this one time, like he's really connected to his emotions. And not what the person was describing, I think Joe Rogan doing his podcast and the whole thing, how he gets all fired up and the whole deal. And I think you could describe Shane Beamer similarly. He was asked about Phil Petty and his family being around the program. And you guys, if you haven't seen the video yet, you got to go check it out. I'm guessing you probably have. But Ryan Brewer addressed the team. One of the ways the program found appropriate to honor Phil Petty and his recent passing was to put up the kind of life-size picture of him on the wall in the Gamecock quarterback's room, added him to Steve Tannehill, Todd Ellis. I think Anthony Wright might be in there as well. Connor Shaw. I think those are the guys now on the wall along with Phil Petty. And Ryan Brewer retold the story to the Gamecock team that he had put on social media about Phil Petty and a drill back in their playing days with Lou Holtz, and just saying he didn't hear a bell, one more round, and just a story that exemplified leadership, right? And especially the way that Ryan told it, being a good friend for Phil Petty, and a teammate, and the relationship's gone on for decades now. And you could feel the attachment that Ryan Brewer has to Phil Petty and that family, and you could feel that from Shane Beamer as well. And this is just coming off the football field Saturday evening after practice number 1, and yet just the emotion. He mentioned how he couldn't imagine being a father himself and being around the kids, and how McCoy, Phil Petty's son, was around practice, and when he was leaving practice, he told Shane Beamer it was might have been the greatest day of his life. Another example of how it just feels a little different around Gamecock football these days. Now, from an on-the-field perspective, relatively status quo. First scrimmage, you can, again, I feel like a lot of times in these things. You take what you want to take from them. And we'll get into some specifics there. First, wanted to pop in a few comments from you guys. DC in first this morning, just after 7 a.m. Anthony with a good morning UFAs, as always. Roger, we see you. Kirby, appreciate you guys joining the program. DC says, my week's off to a better start than Matt Corral. So I'm going to have to check into that thing. Morning, Tim from Josh. And Anthony says, time to warm up the old coach pitch cannon. Well, that's one of the ways that I draft, too. I think I drafted a pitcher. My brother-in-law had been doing it recently. Now, I would like to think our development system has been good enough that he's moved his son up to the next level. So he's off the coach pitch coaching staff now. I think I've got another solid lefty pitcher to join in, but we'll see how it goes. But for all you guys, and one of the reasons why I like to pop your comments in is to show you what kind of voice you have on this show. And to me, it is a co-host voice, if not more than that, right? Co-host would imply like 50-50. I would much prefer you guys have more of the say here, 75%, and then I'll pop in every now and again and say, try to connect the dots maybe. That's how I see myself here. Just to help steer the conversation and to get you guys' thoughts out, to throw topics out, and then we go from there. On Friday, the last show that we did, I think the interaction was at an all-time high from you guys on the live chat. So greatly appreciated again, and would love to hear more takes from where you're sitting. To me, that's the fun part of doing all this, right? Not just to listen to myself yap and yap and yap and tell you what I think and what you should think. Nah, none of that. I'm here to learn, and I'm hoping we all can. What we learned, I don't know what we learned this weekend for Gamecock football. Dramatic coffee sip, by the way. What do you really learn in scrimmages? I think the coaching staff learns a ton. I think the players themselves learn a ton, and what you don't really hear is what is most important. Players learn who they can trust on the field. Coaches learn who they can trust on the field. Maybe I shouldn't even say players and the trust. It's probably more a respect thing from a player standpoint, and that leads to trust, right? The guy makes plays in practice. From a teammate's perspective, the respect you have for him goes up. How he makes those plays, right? How he bounces back from not making a play. What kind of character he shows when he's dog tired or a little banged up. Whatever it might be, right? Challenged by a coach who's going to get in your face. To me, that's the process right now that college football programs are in. Publicly, what do we get at this point? I feel like probably the least, right? I think most college coaches are on full alert right now about the information they want getting out of their program, just from a competitive advantage standpoint mostly. I think that's just where we are in 2022. So the public comments from Shane Beamer about the scrimmage specifically said it was a typical first scrimmage. Defense is ahead of the offense at this point. To me, the headline by far was what guys didn't play. And these names are massively important for Gamecock football in 2022. Marshawn Lloyd, running back. Wake Forest transfer, running back. Christian Beal-Smith. Josh Vann, number 1 returning wide receiver. Corey Rucker, number 1-ish, 1A or 1B, wide receiver transfer in from Arkansas State on the preseason Bolitnikoff Award watch list. Sherrod Green, linebacker, one of 3 guys battling for 2 starting spots, along with Mo Kaba and Brad Johnson. These are very significant names. Now, we don't know about the severity of the injuries. Shane Beamer says they're pretty insignificant, relatively minor. Everybody should be back. If not by today, midweek today, nothing's going to linger. Midweek today, that doesn't make any sense. Midweek this week. So Carolina had yesterday off on Sunday after scrimmaging Saturday. They're back at practice, I think, in here in just a few minutes if you're joining the live stream, 8 to 10 every morning, by the way. But the way we all understand, the way college football works, the way football works in general, you got to keep an eye when a guy doesn't, got to keep an eye on it. It's a situation when a guy doesn't participate in a team scrimmage. Now, would most of these guys have gotten major reps? I don't think so. Maybe in the first scrimmage, that's how it goes. I'm guessing every college coach does it a little differently because it's always that risk reward this time of year, right? I think Steve Spurrier was one of the best, understanding risk reward and practice and physicality and needing to get reps and yet making sure your guys are healthy. Very few major injuries preseason camp-wise on Steve Spurrier's teams because of the way he practiced them, the emphasis he put on protecting your teammates, I think, specifically. I think he deserved a bunch of credit for that. No, some of it is just good fortune, right? Some of it is misfortune. If you look at Will Muschamp's track record for injuries, maybe. And as I take another dramatic coffee sip there, I'm not trying to overhype this at all, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, all 5 of these guys, and you throw in Landon Sampson as well, another headline tight name as a true freshman wide receiver, but a big-time prospect out of the state of Texas. I think he's pretty far down on the depth chart right now from what I've heard, so I didn't put his name in the headlines here because I think all 5 of these guys, Marshawn Lloyd, Christian Beal-Smith at running back, Josh Vann, and Corey Rucker at receiver, and Sherrod Green at linebacker, massively important to Carolina's success in 2022. So to start off scrimmage number 1 on August 13th, a little banged up, not what you would prefer, but it is reality. Just you're going to get guys banged up. And I guess I almost want to give kudos to Carolina football for even just putting this out that these guys didn't participate because of how the old information flows or trickles out, how much or how little we get this time of year. So not putting a ton of stock into missing one scrimmage, don't get me wrong, something to keep an eye on for sure. And I don't know if we even talk about it enough. Maybe that's where we are right now with coaches' salaries being so high, with the price of tickets or attending games being what they are, that what used to be a relatively acceptable excuse, and man, injuries just caught up with this team. I think we have less tolerance for it as college football fans than we ever have. I think because we have more information about nutrition and training, strength and conditioning, all of that. Maybe we start putting on our detective hat and say, well, why did this happen? Or how did this happen? Or how is this going to keep from happening again? Yeah, Troy, well done. Even the resident Clemson fan, another example of how Steve Spurrier, one of the greatest college coaches of all time, talking about keeping his guys healthy, figuring out the proper balance of you just have to have physical practices. You do. Football is a physical game. It's just the nature of the beast. But some coaches figure out the best ways, the most efficient ways to get the physical work done without as many injuries piling up seemingly than other programs. DC says, hopefully none of the QBs kick a locker until the offseason. Jake Pentley reference there. Well done. Oh, Josh, first tardy day of the new school year. Was super excited for Charlotte FC to play LAFC. Very disappointed with the results. I'll take your word for it on that one, Josh. Sorry for your disappointment there, sir. Sounds like LA stuck it to Charlotte on the soccer field yesterday. But paying much more attention to the college football storylines these days, and you can't do that in college football over the weekend without keeping track of recruiting for sure. So the big recruiting news that you need to know from the Gamecock perspective is Thursday, 5 o'clock this week. That's the big time to circle, put it on your calendar. Camden, big time defensive line prospect, and I wrote down the numbers here, the specifics, just for clarity, right? He's these numbers according to On3, which is part of the Gamecock Central website, number 3 prospect in the state, number 201 overall in the entire country, 25th ranked defensive lineman according to On3, 6'4", 325. So massive. Been a good player for a long time. About 25, 30 minutes away from the campus of South Carolina, Williams-Brice Stadium. So at Zemp Stadium, 5 o'clock over in Camden, Mcleod will be making his commitment. Xavier Mcleod. And this is one the Gamecocks got to have, especially after what happened over the weekend. Kelby Collins was in the mix to be a Gamecock. Big defensive lineman committing to Florida. They got another commit for this year's class, and then added the son of Ernest Graham for the 2024 class. So Florida has shot way up in these team rankings. They're up to number 10 in the country, right behind Clemson, who's down to number 9. The Gamecocks staying steady at number 21. Bakari Swain, the latest to commit to Carolina. I think this was right after Friday's show. 3-star athlete, he's thought to be out of the state of Georgia. Most likely projected to play defensive back. Just a little bit over 6 feet tall, I think, and 160-plus pounds right now. So that translates either to wide receiver or defensive back, and it's just listed as an athlete right now. But he is the 17th official commit right now, I think. Carolina up to 10 3-stars, 7 4-stars, number 21 ranked in the country. And if we're talking recruiting, interesting little interaction on social media. I think this was right after that Kelby Collins commitment to Florida. Florida native Pup Howard, big-time linebacker who's in the class of 2023 for the Gamecocks, put this out on Twitter. I'll pop up the actual tweet up on the video portion of the show. God blessed me to be in this position, and I'm not taking it for granted. And then the screenshot, I guess you'd call this just a graphic, right? Loyalty isn't gray, it's black and white. You're either loyal completely or not loyal at all. I think if Gamecock fans could have written some sort of graphic they would like to see from one of their highest rated recruits out of the state of Florida, while Florida continues to gain momentum in recruiting, including a defensive line commit over Carolina over the weekend, that would have been it. Exactly. Those words, or something very close to it, would have been exactly what Gamecock fans would have loved to see. Chris, hopping in on the Facebook live stream, says, working hard this morning. 8 a.m. snuck up on me. One of those mornings. That's a heck of a way to start the week. Well done, Chris. That's how you want to start the week. You don't want to start it the opposite way, right? Hard at work, look up at the clock. Oh, man. It is not even close to 8 o'clock in the morning on the Monday. DC, why do you say that sounds like a Mike Bobo quote? It sounds like the opposite of Bobo quote, doesn't it? Loyalty is black and white, not gray. I guess that was probably a little sarcasm coming from DC there. So, interesting movement for sure as it pertains to Gamecock football recruiting. You're not seeing a complete wave, right, of Carolina ticking off all the 4-star guys. There was a 4-star wide receiver from up in Virginia. Trying to think of his name specifically. I'm sure some of you can do that. Carmelo was the first name, I think. That was the one that I was trying to think of. I thought that was the harder part. Anyway, he ended up picking Penn State last week, I think, over Carolina. It was one of those just misses. And I think the Collins commitment to Florida, another just miss. So it's not a complete, you're hitting on all cylinders, where the narrative would be absolutely Shane Beamer and company on fire on the recruiting trail. That narrative has shifted over to Florida and Billy Napier. And it's so silly how it works in recruiting it from where I sit. Again, I know some people are in it every day, and God bless you guys. That's not me, man. I can't do it. There's no way I could. I wonder if there's any of these guys out there, guys that do that every day, keeping track of a bunch of 16 and 17-year-olds and how they're interacting with guys getting paid 6 and 7 figures to bring them to their programs. So you got that as dramatic as it can be, which is pretty dramatic. And then if these recruiting experts also had kids who you're dealing with that mess, I feel like that would definitely make my head explode. I just can't do that. But I wasn't a big recruiting guy even before I had kids, but especially with kids and trying to coach them running around, no, can't do it. Just can't do it. But definitely something to keep an eye on. I like to think the major themes from recruiting, certainly something to keep an eye on, as opposed to getting in the weeds and checking out all the trees through the forest. I'm not going to be that guy. And that's what makes, that mentality is what makes what's happened at Kentucky the last few days fascinating, which I don't think many people from the state of South Carolina have ever said in August, right? Kentucky Kentucky and Vanderbilt completely ignored most of the time in our preseason conversations. Dramatic coffee sip there. Outside the last, what is it now, 6-7 years, South Carolina has, by and large, dominated against Kentucky and Vanderbilt. Kentucky has flipped that script in a major way the last 6-7 years. Mark Stoops deserves a bunch of credit. The very rational and reasonable conversation this time last year was, how can Mark Stoops get as much respect around the SEC as he does with a record that is slightly above 500 in his career? And the easy answer to that is Kentucky's that tough a job. Steve Spurrier always used to be unafraid to say that out loud, which certainly came across as an insult to the entire program, but it's absolutely true. It's a tough job, man. It is, I would say, similar to the South Carolina basketball job, because Kentucky is a basketball school. And John Calipari dared to utter that out loud the other day, and it really ticked off Mark Stoops. I mentioned, I think it was at the end of maybe our last show, that the big conspiracy theory I would love to have happened was if Stoops and Calipari had kind of just generated this story themselves behind the scenes to get the conversation out there a little bit more publicly about funding for a practice facility for the basketball program, and maybe even just how improved the football program is too. And that would have been brilliant PR strategy. It is clear to me now that we've heard more from Mark Stoops. I'm thinking over the weekend he talked after their first scrimmage as well and was asked about this. And it's one of those things that when you ask someone a question, if you're just a few words into the question, you can see the other person's body language change completely. And you have hit on a sore spot, a sensitive spot, or one either they don't want to talk about it, or they absolutely do want to talk about, they're just ticked off about. You guys know that feeling when you're asking that question? Maybe in 2022, it's a feeling that we don't have nearly as much as we did 3 years ago before COVID hit, and there was more human personal interaction without a 6-foot window between us, social distancing and all that. But rarely do you get this on camera, I feel like, or can you sense this? Maybe that was part of Steve Spurrier's kind of lightning rod persona, that it kind of came through the screen at you how he was really feeling about things, just because Spurrier being Spurrier. But you can feel it. You could feel it watching Stoops over the weekend, talking about his program and him saying, I stay in my lane. And this program wasn't born on third base. And there's been a lot of hard work. And it is insulting to everyone who has put in that work to hear what they heard from John Calipari. Now, to me, completely overly sensitive here. To me, as I'm sitting here, I'm just a guy who yaps about sports every day, nearly every day. I'm not a person who has taken a less than average SEC football program and built it into respectability and done it from a defensive standpoint and been pretty consistent at it, especially the last few years, and have had to do that at a school that is in a massive shadow of its basketball program. So it doesn't make much sense for me to think about how I would handle this if I were Mark Stoops, because I'm not. There's no way I could have done anything close to what he's done. DC says, imagine the poor fellow that takes the Kentucky coaching job when Mark leaves. Yeah, maybe that's how it works. I don't know. I think one of the things that Stoops has done, I don't know, but I'm thinking back, right? Like Rich Brooks was a pretty good football coach. Coached in the NFL, had some success. I mean, I'm not trying to tell you he was a good SEC football coach or one of the best coaches in the country or anything like that. I'm telling you that I think he came to Kentucky with a pretty good reputation, and I think it's fair to say that he left it with a pretty decent reputation. Joker Phillips is kind of the guy who dragged that program down or sent it as far down as it went from my perspective. One of the things that Stoops has done seemingly at Kentucky, and it's the thing that I think deserves the most credit, is the consistency he's built, the identity that he's built around that program. Like we saw Tim Couch pop in and Kentucky be halfway relevant back in the day. We saw that continue to a certain degree. The hefty lefty and Jared Lorenzen was fantastic and great for college football. They haven't been completely irrelevant, but they certainly haven't been a consistently good team. Not near to the level what they've been here in the last few years, I don't feel like, anyway. And now that they're projected to finish second in the East, and it appears like Stoops is kind of right there in the prime of his career and has that program primed to continue to contend's a little high. Continue to compete and stay relevant. Contending for an SEC East title is, I think, a little bit too high there, with Georgia sitting there with what they have coming off the national championship. So not quite a contender, because to be a contender to win the SEC East, you got to be a national championship contender. There doesn't seem to be a contender this year outside of Georgia. But being top 25 team, maybe top 15-ish even, in the last several years, that's kind of what Kentucky's been. Or at least a lot closer to that than I think at any stretch, any 5-year stretch maybe, certainly 7 to 8 year stretch that I can remember in Kentucky football. And I think you gotta be that guy who is going to take offense to the Kentucky basketball school comments that John Calipari made. You gotta be a guy like Mark Stoops. It's the only way it's gonna happen, man. But now that has put, I think, Kentucky fans in an odd spot of almost choosing their loyalty between the basketball program and the football program, or that weird spot where they are more supportive of their football coach right now than their basketball coach, because Kentucky basketball standard expectation is so amazingly high. If you're not going to at least the Sweet 16 every year, you are disappointing. You are a failure. Your season is a failure if you're not in the Sweet 16 at Kentucky basketball. Just is what it is. A lot like South Carolina baseball, right? And again, I get it. The NCAA basketball tournament, Kentucky basketball, perennial powerhouse, and the tradition and how that kind of runs the state, that is a different level than South Carolina baseball. There's no doubt about it. But when you're talking about success on the court, on the field, wins and losses, especially here in the last couple of decades, relatively comparable. And man, those programs have such a small window, small wiggle room for keeping that fan base happy or satisfied, even not even happy, right? Just satisfied, keeping them from going at your throat as the coach, somebody in charge of that program. Okay, DC, I'm with you. Kentucky's taking advantage of Carolina, Florida, and Tennessee being down. Absolutely, but they also deserve some credit for those things happening. If you didn't have a coach as good as Mark Stoops there, even Carolina, Florida, and Tennessee being down should still be better than Kentucky traditionally, historically, right? I mean, that was it 21 games, 23 games? I don't know what it was. It was the ridiculous streak of Florida beating Kentucky. All those Florida teams weren't great, and yet they were still able to beat Kentucky for all those years until a couple of years ago, finally. And that was the knock on South Carolina back in the day, right? Back in that 2010 championship, next 3 years, even to some degree, Florida, Tennessee being down. But those programs can't be down unless the other ones have risen above them. So I'm not totally disagreeing with you. I just think that you got to give those programs credit for taking advantage. Like you're always going to see some flux for sure. But Kentucky and Mark Stoops deserve credit for getting the program to where it is right now, because it looks like all three of those programs that you mentioned, Carolina, Florida, and Tennessee, I don't think you would talk to anyone in their fan base right now who would disagree that the programs are on a positive trajectory, that are on their way up. And Kentucky's in the way, man. And so maybe that also goes into it. Mark Stoops knows that. I mean, that also goes into the mentality right now of the last thing I need if I'm Mark Stoops is my basketball coach who loves attention to bring more attention on his program or take any kind of slight at my football program. He's supposed to be part of the team, right? He's supposed to be helpful. So now you got that going on in Kentucky. Fascinating, man. And again, to see that compared to, or to have that feeling around that Kentucky program, that Kentucky athletics department, compared to what's going on around the South Carolina athletics department, where you got Lamont Paris pulling in G.G. Jackson and Don Staley winning national championships, Shane Beamer, nearly 100% unanimous approval rate. And you got the baseball program that is not on that positive upswing train, but outside of that, things feeling pretty good from a Gamecock fan perspective, I think, right now. The Kentucky fan, I think, has to be pulled a little bit, or maybe they've actually unfathomable for me to even try to say, which has struggled, to think that they would be more supportive right now of their football program than the basketball program. More loyalty towards their football coach in Mark Stoops than the basketball coach in John Calipari. Crazy. Craig's got a great point, man. Kentucky's proven that if you get your lines of scrimmage right, you can win in this league. They haven't had good quarterback play really until Levis, and they've still won. Yeah, and I would argue that Levis hadn't been great. He's not Tim Couch. He's not Jared Lorenzen even. They've had better quarterbacks, man. At least from what I saw last year. Now, he's got the opportunity to change my mind on that, and maybe it was those couple of years of touchdown Terry before him where it seemed like if it ever got to a point where he had to throw them into a win, if it was on his shoulders, pun intended, I guess, for them to win a big game, that wasn't going to happen, man. But he did make enough plays for them to win enough to win a significant amount of games for us to be talking about it right now. And Craig hit on it completely. And to me, it's mostly been on the offensive side of the ball. How Kentucky has been able to develop and keep it going, be consistent on the offensive line, one of the best in the league and really in the country, right? If you're one of the best offensive lines of the SEC, you've got one of the best offensive lines in the country. And then, the long dynamic DBs is another part of that. Gone to the league for sure. So the Kentucky, and that's what you got to do, right? Wherever you are, you got to figure out the unique recipe for your school's success, especially if you're not one of the blue bloods in the SEC. That was the main thing that was wrong with the Will Muschamp philosophy, right? With the Jeremy Pruitt philosophy. Already been done. What are you doing different than the Nick Saban model that you saw succeed at Alabama? Because that model doesn't succeed everywhere, man. It just doesn't. You have to differentiate yourself. You have to be unique. That's part of what's fascinating, I feel like, about what's going on in Florida right now. Because the narrative around that program, what was it, just six weeks ago or so? Maybe 2 months? That this is not working. Billy Napier keeps missing on the recruiting trail. This has not been the upgrade that we were promised. That was the reason we hired a young guy that got Louisiana to relevance, who could come in and immediately make an impact and understood everything it takes to recruit in 2022. And this is not working. And if he's not going to be able to recruit these guys, then how are they going to win games on Saturday? Because he certainly doesn't have the play calling reputation of Dan Mullen. But here we are in the middle of August and just over a weekend where I think it was a couple of big-time guys, Kelby Collins included, picked the Gators over South Carolina, and then Ernest Graham's son, big-time prospect for the class of 2024. Florida's up, I don't even know how many spots, at least a handful of spots, I think, in the national recruiting rankings, up to number 10. That narrative has been rewritten right before our eyes. And I think the Florida fan base has at least backed down, right? If not transformed their thinking about their first-year head coach in Billy Napier. But what's going to be the recipe for his success? Urban Meyer did it the best coming off the Spurrier years, and I get it, Ron Zook was the buffer in between. But he created his own identity in a lot of ways. It was not the Steve Spurrier fun and gun, but it was an exciting offense that scored a bunch of points and did it their way. He kept that thing. He took it to another level. Jason popping in on the YouTube live stream. Morning to you, sir. Talking a bunch of football this morning, especially from an SEC perspective, with Kentucky coach Mark Stoops being in the news for sure. getting right after John Calipari, after the comments of Kentucky's a basketball school. And that's part of it too, right? It's one thing to say I stay in my lane. Well, yeah, you have to stay in your lane when you're the Kentucky football coach. You have to. And if you haven't won a bunch of preseason games lately, or a bunch of postseason games lately, or a postseason game lately, then you dang well should be staying in your lane in August as the Kentucky basketball coach. But when you're down in the Bahamas and you're John Calipari, you play by different rules. And he ticked off the football coach, and he went right back at him, and it's fascinating to watch. Fascinating to watch any kind of fracture within an SEC fan base, because it's certainly been in South Carolina, right? We saw it not too long ago. The supportive fan of their football coach until he's not the football coach, or the other one saying, no, this guy, you can't support this guy. He's driving the program the complete wrong way. Losing it. You're losing the program. So by supporting the current coach, you're only making things worse. And then former players and coaches and fans getting into it in certain ways. Wasn't pretty. And it was just a difficult guy to support in a lot of ways at the end of the Will Muschamp era. I mean, even at the beginning. But a couple of, certainly an improved year in year number 1, going 9-4, winning an Outback Bowl in year number 2. Looks like you got a face of the program type that can maybe take things to a near championship level, at least a contending type of program in the SEC East with Jake Bentley, and then it just goes all wrong. And it was tough to watch in a lot of ways, especially if you had seen the Steve Spurrier heyday years, seen everything the program had accomplished and built up to. From where I sat, having seen 21 losses in a row at the end of the Brad Scott era and the beginning of the Lou Holtz era, having seen that turn around, then a bit of a lull, and then certainly taking things to the next level. What we saw at the end of the Will Muschamp era wasn't a lull. It was a dive and a crash in a lot of ways. And now you're seeing the build back process. And then I think you've seen that at the end of last year with Florida, Auburn, and North Carolina wins. You saw that like kind of at an exponential rate for Gamecock football. Now you're seeing that success, the expectations it's creating for some, the excitement, enthusiasm, and all that, you're seeing that push into the next season. Roger, strong. Stoops can say, at least I didn't lose to St. Peter's. I mean, and that's part of it too. I think maybe that's part of the license that Mark Stoops has. Maybe it's also part of the disdain he feels, like, hey, you're making the Sweet 16, you're making Final Fours every single year, or a lot more consistently than you have lately. Okay, I get it. You're right. I won't say anything, but that hadn't been the case. And Stoops pipes right up. And Kentucky is that much fun right now from, I think, most of the SEC's perspective, if not the country. Because, man, the margin for error for that football program has always been tiny, infinitesimal usually. Right? You got to get one of the best quarterbacks in the country and a guy like Tim Couch. You got to be able to make sure you don't make mistakes and fumble the football a bunch like has happened recently in some big games to keep them from going anywhere close to an SEC East championship. You got to have one of the best offensive lines in the country and a defense that can force turnovers at one of the highest rates in the country just to make yourself relevant because that program wasn't born on third base. Man, that's the one that just sticks out to me. I know he said, I stay in my lane. And clearly, John Calipari not in this situation. But this program, not born on third base, I think is going to stick around a long time for those of us who love SEC football. And that'll probably get used against him to some degree, right? But that I don't think that happens very much. I don't think we've seen a situation where Kentucky and South Carolina are going head to head for a guy. Was it Drew Barker, the quarterback? Maybe the only one that I can remember. He didn't turn out to be a player anyway. But a guy South Carolina football and G.A. Mangus was going after back in the day, who chose Kentucky, his home state, over playing quarterback for Steve Spurrier. Turned out it might have been a blessing in disguise. Just didn't work. So you got that situation going down. You got people around Florida football feeling good, and it is at such a place kind of off the field, the recruiting battles for a guy in a highly thought of prospect, one of the highest rated prospects in the Gamecocks class 2023, Pup Howard, linebacker from Jacksonville, to put out the tweet over the weekend about loyalty. Again, something to keep an eye on for sure. And this is a storyline that doesn't just last in the recruiting process, right? This is the backstory that guys take into their careers and make priority when you're talking about motivation and playing future opponents. Loyalty, not gray. It's black and white. You're either loyal completely or not loyal at all. I think one Florida fan came at this, 17-year-old Max on Twitter saying, that's just something you say when you don't have major offers. No one does that. No one has South Carolina as their dream school, was this Florida fan's take. And I saw that Howard went back at him and said, no, I got all the offers, respectfully. So a sign there. This is part of I think this is why I like following recruiting a little bit more in 2022 than I have in years past, because you can see some of this stuff pop out publicly. And you do get a sense, at least I feel like I get a sense of these guys' personalities coming into their situation. And obviously there's the other side of it too, where if you're a fan and you're even tweeting, commenting that much, even at all, specifically to them or even about them on social media these days, it's a weird spot to be. And yeah, it gets sideways real quick, no doubt about it. But that one was interesting, man, for sure. And something to keep an eye on as Carolina's recruiting again will be center stage this week. Thursday, 5 o'clock is what you need to know. Camden's defensive lineman Xavier Mcleod, 5 o'clock this Thursday, has been the public comment has been the hometown school does have the advantage. And the other programs involved here, certainly notable. Georgia, Florida, Michigan. 201st prospect rated as that. Take that for what it's worth. In the country. 201. Number 3 in the state of South Carolina. You've already seen a couple of big South Carolina prospects choose the Gamecocks. This one is massive for Shane Beamer, especially after what's happened, I guess, here in the last week or so. A couple of 4-star guys South Carolina was in the mix for did not choose the Gamecocks. Kelby Collins over the weekend, another defensive lineman. Then wide receivers, Carmelo Taylor, I believe is his name, up in Virginia, choosing Penn State. So the massive momentum that Carolina's recruiting class had picked up right around the 4th of July and onward for a few weeks, I think fair to say that it's slowed down a little bit, even though the Gamecocks did pick up a commitment from a Georgia 3-star athlete, Bakari Swain, on Friday. They had lost one before, right? So And then that one came back too, so I don't even know where to go on that one. But Carolina had been sitting, I think, right at number 21 as it comes to national recruiting rankings here in the last maybe couple of weeks or so. And that's where they sit as we're here today. Florida has shot up to number 10. Clemson at number 9. So a couple of numbers to keep an eye on as it pertains to college football in the middle of August, with preseason camps fully underway now. As things start to turn, I think you still got another solid week, right? We're 3 weeks away from playing, a little less than 3 weeks. And I feel like most college camps are set up in a 4-week camp period. First 2 weeks, it's all about us installing what we need to install, figuring out exactly who we trust to be out there, what kind of rotation we're going to get, who is vying for the most playing time, and then kind of developing a pecking order there. Shane Beamer talking about it on Saturday, mentioning his top 5 defensive backs that they seem to have pretty set, right? Cam Smith on the outside, Marcellus Dial and Darius Rush. They're outside guys. Then R.J. Roderick and Devontae Reed, the transfer from Central Michigan, seem to be the solidified safeties. Now they got to find guys behind them. They got to develop the depth. Those guys have seemingly separated themselves. And then other guys got to play their way into any kind of rotation. Got to work their way up the depth chart or into those spots that, man, are pretty massively important. You talk about depth and what you got to have in the SEC and quality depth and the whole thing. Just saying those out loud, it was the 3 guys battling at linebacker for 2 spots on the field consistently. And one of those guys in Sherrod Green being out on Saturday. He was the most notable defensive absence, I think, on the offensive side of the ball. And maybe it's because we overhype the offensive side of the ball, but running back and wide receiver, pretty important positions. Marshawn Lloyd, Christian Beal-Smith, Josh Mann, Corey Rucker, all missing the scrimmage. Shane Beamer saying they were all minor stuff, kind of foot-leg deals that should not keep any of those guys from practicing significantly this week. And if not back today, after a day off yesterday, then certainly midweek was the thought process, or what Shane had to say on Saturday. Craig saying super excited about Rose and Imanwari's future. Yeah, that was another notable comment for sure from Shane Beamer over the weekend. Nick Imanwari is a linebacker, I believe, from Irmo. Rose DB, talking about young guys that are sticking out. And that's a tricky one for me, because I think a lot of times, too, it is the head coach's perception of what they're expecting maybe versus what they're seeing on the field, or exactly how they're showing them. I feel like a lot of times young players, especially on defense, sometimes they'll end up making plays because they're not understanding the defense, and that can kind of be a bit of an outlier and maybe a false first impression that you get from some guys. But that's not how Shane Beamer was talking about his young guys on defense. He was saying they're football players, and that's probably that's one of the highest compliments you can get from your head football coach just a few weeks into your first preseason camp. Those guys are football players. You get called a football player, you're good to go. About the Tonster there, Pup Howard's message will be remembered by Gamecock fans and will only increase his NIL value when he gets here. I won't forget it. It's a good point, man. Something that we've never even had to consider before in a recruiting process. Well, legitimately, right? What you say on social media, how you're saying things, especially in times where it can look a little suspect, depending on where you're from and what's going on around you with other SEC programs. yeah, Chris. Well, if you run the 4-2-6, you've definitely done something. Because that means you got 12 guys on the field by my math. He asks, are we still running the 4-2-6? I think 4-2-5, I think, is technically what that is. Or maybe you go 3-2-6. But definitely 2 linebackers. Another defensive back. I mentioned the 5 that they feel good with. So I think technically they would go 4-2-5. That thing gets all kind of blown out of proportion, right? Chris has fat fingers. All kind of out of proportion because you got guys on the edge. What's an edge these days? Is an edge a linebacker? Is an edge a defensive end? I think it depends on the play, what you're asking of them to do. So to me, that's semantics kind of stuff. All you got to know is that Clayton White's running the defense again. Clayton White did a tremendous job in year number 1. And clearly kind of made the most of what he had. I think he's got at least as much to work with this year. I get it. JJ Enigbare's gone. Aaron Sterling gone from an edge perspective. That's concerning. But Shane Beamer continuing to talk pretty highly of his defensive interior, which is just music to Gamecock fans' ears, I think, having watched the last several years. And getting pushed around, I think, is a very fair way to put it up front from a defensive line perspective. And I would argue on both sides of the ball to some degree. That's where Craig was talking about. Yeah, Stoops gets it, man. You're strong on the lines of scrimmage. Craig said earlier, you can win in this league. Absolutely. And there are ways to get around that too, right? Your quarterback is good enough to kind of mask that, to run around and make plays when things break down. Then you can win in the league, but you're one injury away from just your program going in the tank, if that's what you're relying on. And that seemed to be what the end of the Mike Bobo era was, just throwing Luke Doty back there and saying, hey, man, just run around. Colin Hill is just getting smashed. There's very few ways we can scheme around that is anywhere close to successful, so we got to get you out there and you got to run around. York weighing in with a hey gang, getting closer. Yes, we are, York. And it feels good, doesn't it? And as we get close to rolling into hour number 2 here, wanted to tell you about one of the sponsors of the program. Proud to tell you about Freedom Primary Care. As we sit here on August 15th, 2022, having freedom over your medical choices is a thing in our country. And it never dawned on me that I'd be talking about this, especially at a show that talks about sports mostly. But here we are. It's one of the reasons why I am here with you on the Unrestricted Free Agent, because I value the freedom for my personal medical choices highly these days, more highly than I ever have before. And Freedom Primary Care shares that value with me. That's why it's a great match for me. If that's something that's important to you or ultimately important to you, I recommend you give them a call, 803-627-2447. It's a place that will give you options. They're responsible to you, not for you. And that is exactly in line with my thought process when it comes to healthcare. I need someone to help support me, not to tell me that they know everything and this is exactly what you got to do. And if you don't do it, then you don't know what you're doing or how to take care of yourself, kind of thing. They're going to give you, if you're looking for more natural-minded plans of care, they can help you down that route for sure. If you're looking for more traditional routes of care, they will absolutely do that for you as well. That's the partnership with Freedom Primary Care. Extremely valued from my end. I appreciate them supporting the show. If you can support them, 803-627-2447. That's Freedom Primary Care up in Fort Mill right now. Still plenty of telemedicine options for you if you're not in the area here in 2022. That's just how things are done. Hope we get the Tiger Hater Mcleod this week. York leads us off with in hour number 2, talking about big-time Camden defensive lineman Xavier Mcleod committing 5 o'clock Thursday evening this week. A lot of Gamecock fans already have that circled, and I think it's fair to say at this point, the most important recruit in the Shane Beamer era. I'll try to back up that hype right after you hear a little bit from one of our esteemed guests recently on the program. How about we get going with this one again? One last time we'll play Stuart Lake's baseball heckling story. Braves, big weekend, 6 in a row now, sweeping the Marlins. They start a 4-game set with the Mets. They're 5.5 games back, I believe it is, or maybe just 5 games back, starting the 4-game set with the Mets tonight. A great heckling story, even if you've heard it, worth hearing one more time. And this will give a little break here in between hour number 1 and hour number 2. Looking forward to getting into that conversation about Gamecock football, both what we saw over the weekend, how we're setting up things from a recruiting standpoint, and how it applies to the other SEC programs that Carolina is competing with on a day in and day out basis. Do much more of that after this little story from Stuart Lake.
Brett Anderson played for us at College of Charleston. Brett still lives in Charleston. He's got a great career. He laughs because I love telling this story. Well, we go to play Georgia. College of Charleston, we're going to play a Tuesday night and a Wednesday afternoon game. And Brett was really good. This was that Brett Gardner was on the team. We had a really good team. We go in, and in right field at Georgia, they used to all sit on that hill before they kind of ran all the frat out of there to some way. And they're just yelling the most personal things, like a girlfriend's name, his pet's name, his best, things that I'm going, there must be your best friend goes to Georgia and sold you out. So he came in the dugout, and after about 3 innings, he is clearly rattled. He was our middle of lineup hitter. Coach Pulowski ended up taking him out of the game. He had gotten so rattled by their fans. And when we get back to the hotel that night, I go around to do room check, and I go in his room, and he actually roomed with Brett Gardner. They were roommates at home and on the road and everything. And Brett Gardner is laughing like a child. And I said, what's so funny? He goes, we just found out how they know all that stuff that they just did. And they called him BA. He said, now we know. I said, what happened? Well, a heckler had called his mom and told him that Brett had won an award, and they just made up this elaborate, and she did over an hour interview with the heckler on the phone. She had no idea it had anything to do with Georgia, anything. His mom called that night, because this was back before games were on TV, and called and said, hey, they're going to get you while you're there. You've won a prestigious baseball award. So the poor kid now is just laughing like, Mom, you told him my nickname as a child. You told them our pet's name. You told them my high school girlfriend's name. Why would you have ever thought they needed to know all that? And she's like, he was so nice. The young man doing the thing to present this to you was so nice.
So nice. I love that, man. I love that so much. So nice. Really is nice that you guys are joining the program today. I appreciate it for sure. All seriousness. Josh starting us off in hour number 2, YouTube live stream. We beat Florida again. This could all change. He's talking about recruiting right now. I don't know, Josh. Because this all isn't, I don't even think it's a perceived massive advantage right now for Florida football over the Gamecocks for in-state recruits. Because Florida football hasn't been Florida football in how long, man? I mean, and this is crazy, too, because they almost beat Alabama last year. Was that week 3? Could have very easily beaten Alabama last year. So let's be very clear. I'm not trying to tell you that Florida football's fallen off the map. But we saw them come into Williams-Brice Stadium and get the tar kicked out of them, too, right? So Florida is not anywhere close to what it has been. I mean, how far back we got to go now? We got to go back to Urban Meyer, right? I understand they've won a few SEC East titles since then, but Jim McElwain and that debacle coming off the Will Muschamp era, what to go watch Dan Mullen fail like that, to watch that implode like it did, shocking to me. So I'm not sure there's that much of a change right now. I think in Florida, you should always have an advantage for a Florida guy over the South Carolina program, much like South Carolina right now has the advantage for the South Carolina guy in Xavier Mcleod over Florida and Georgia and Michigan. And he said as much, right? The home state school has the advantage. I think that's the only advantage Florida has had over these last couple of commits, a flip to Carolina or from Carolina to Florida, and Kelby Collins choosing Florida over the weekend over Carolina. I don't think it's that Florida's program is at a different spot like it has been so many years, right? And just that much more elevated over South Carolina. Clearly, Florida has won more, right? There is more. There's a deeper, richer history of winning at Florida than South Carolina. But you want to talk about August 15th, 2022, Florida's picked 4th in the SEC East, and the Gamecocks are picked 5th. The last time we saw the two teams on the field, it was not even close, even though Florida came into the game ranked 20th in country and I think a 19-point favorite. And South Carolina did it with a quarterback who played at a program that I didn't even know existed before he came to South Carolina in St. Francis in Pennsylvania. Jason Brown, who saw the writing on the wall with Spencer Rattler coming in and has now gone off to Virginia Tech. So I think it's fascinating where those two programs are right now. The Gamecocks played up for that game? Absolutely, Josh. To me, it is the game of the Spurrier, of the Beamer era, excuse me. Just the fact that I would make that Freudian slip, I think, compliment to Shane Beamer for sure. But the Florida-South Carolina connections maybe had me thinking there Steve Spurrier. And it was probably Florida's worst game of the season. So I'm not trying to tell you that South Carolina's program is in a better position overall right now than Florida, but they're not far away. And I think you can make the argument. And a large part of that is how Shane Beamer has the Gamecock fan base unified, united, everybody moving in the same direction. And maybe it's because it's August, and maybe it's coming off of a bowl win. And if we had not have seen what we saw at Bank of America Stadium the last time out, probably wouldn't be saying that. But that's where we are. It's reality. I'm not making it up. And Billy Napier, while getting some recruiting wins here recently, and you do, he deserves credit for having Florida at number 10 in the country right now in the recruiting rankings. But South Carolina being number 21 and Xavier Mcleod making his decision this Thursday at 5. You add him to the fold. This is why I think he's the most important recruit that we've seen in the Shane Beamer era. Not only because of what kind of prospect he is, but because of the timing. Because there's still a tremendous foundation for the class of 2023 from a South Carolina football recruiting standpoint. They're number 21 in the country for a reason. 7 4-star guys. Have another 4-star guy, though, right down the road and at the position of importance that he is. Just going back to Craig's comments, right? Kentucky's been able to win because they've solidified their lines. When you have high-level line play, you can win in the SEC. South Carolina has not had that. in the last several years, especially on the defensive side of the ball, where that is, if you had to pick one position that led South Carolina to the greatest 4-year stretch in its school history, double-digit wins, an SEC East title, 3 straight 11-2 seasons, and top 10 finishes. The defensive line is the one position you would point to. I mean, you got Jadeveon Clowney up there for those last 3 seasons. That makes things different for sure. You got Melvin Ingram developing into an All-American and a first-round NFL draft pick. Difference maker. Him slamming Greg McElroy to the ground in the fourth quarter of that 2010 upset against the number 1 Tide there is a visual that just sticks in my head of, I can't believe what I'm seeing. Are you believing this? Was what was going through my mind. Because it was just 11 years before Carolina was going over. 11 years later, beating the number 1 team in the country en route to a division championship, first ever, only one to this point, and then 3 straight top 10 seasons. And now it's 11 seasons later after that 2010 year, going into the 12th year later, and it almost flipped in that time period as well, with the 2-8 season with Will Muschamp at the end of that era. But now it has a chance to recycle, if you will. And Shane Beamer was there for that building process. He was there on the field that day in 2010 when Melvin Ingram was slamming Greg McElroy down. He was the recruiting coordinator at that time for South Carolina and deserves a ton of the credit for that season and those seasons to come. And now he's back, and now you have another big-time recruit in the state of South Carolina on the defensive line set to make a pretty major decision. Now, it would be massively unfair to say that Mcleod from Camden to give him Jadeveon Clowney-sized expectations. Again, here is, and it's not a G.G. Jackson situation either where you're the number 1 recruit in the country, but I will say, in my mind, it's very similar in that the perception of this decision is going to be more important than the reality. Because I think the reality is, even where Mcleod is projected as the 3rd best player in the state of South Carolina, I'll give you the rest of those numbers, 201st best player in the country. I think like number 25 defensive lineman. Yeah, I see it now. Odds are you're going to come to Carolina and be a solid player, maybe even develop into an All-American type. But it's not going to be something that the South Carolina program has never seen before, in all likelihood, right? No offense to this specific player, just talking reality here. The reality is that should Xavier Mcleod come to South Carolina, he has a chance to do something that has been done already for the most part and to help get Carolina back to the mountaintop for sure. But odds are, whether he chooses Carolina or whether he doesn't, from an on-the-field X's and O's standpoint, it won't be a seismic decision from the reality standpoint. From the perception standpoint, I think it will be. And it has a chance to be a greater negative than it does to be a positive from the South Carolina position, because he's a local guy, because he's already come out and said, yeah, the home state school has the advantage. Everything kind of in South Carolina's favor here. So from how I look at it, you got to land this guy. He's got to be a guy you continue to build around in this class of 2023. And I think it would be one of those cases like if he does not commit, if he decides to go everywhere else, well, if you're Pup Howard down in Jacksonville or other players, like how do you not kind of rethink where you're coming at it from? Because again, let's remember how tenuous these things are, how small a margin it is in SEC football. You go back just to last season for South Carolina, and we've done this before, and I only do it just as kind of a reality check, right? And Shane Beamer was even talking about it over the weekend. I think he was asked about, is there anything you're doing to try to remedy some slow starts that you had last year? And they were much more than just slow starts. But if that's how you want to put it, against East Carolina, down 14-0 right before halftime, before pick six, changed the entire tenor of that game. Maybe it was 14-3. Whatever it was, East Carolina completely in control there. And South Carolina fortunate that play happened. Vanderbilt could have easily lost the game. You had Zeb Nolan come in and make a play at the end. Troy, you win 23-14. Not exactly a dominating performance. So examples of how things could have gone the other way and we would have a different perception going into year number 2. Now, again, it didn't. That's reality. But you can't just harp on Florida and Auburn and North Carolina and not remember Tennessee and Texas A&M and some other examples of things not going well, because that's reality. That's what the coaching staff has to deal with for sure. That's the same players that you can be excited about and have enthusiasm about and optimistic about might be using those not so good examples as motivation, and maybe that will help them only in the large run, in the long run. But they were also on the field when things weren't going well in some of those situations. That's reality. To me, reality here, again, I think McLeod's going to be a good player, but odds are he's not going to be a program-changing type of player. I don't think this is a program-changing type of decision, but I do think it could hurt Carolina more than it will help them. It's one, though, that you got to have, if that makes sense. To me, you got to have a 4-star defensive line prospect from Camden who's already come out and said the home state school has the advantage. You got to lock him up when you're sitting at number 21 in the country. Yeah, DC says that Troy game was really ugly. Yeah, and really easy to forget, right? From a good Gamecock fan's perspective, yeah, just let that one go, man. Give him a pass. Shane Beamer's first year. A lot of stuff was going down. Really easy to overlook might be the best way to put that. But when you're a coach, you get paid not to overlook stuff. Now, you don't have to harp on the negative, but you do have to deal with the negative. Like, make sure that doesn't happen again. And I think it would be a pretty massive negative if Carolina doesn't get this commit. You call that kind of, I don't know, a jaded way to look at things. I just think it's reality, man. Well, but Craig, this is everyone's, by and large, every high school player, especially big-time player, and when you're 6'4", 325, I had this situation on a much lower level. Please indulge me here for another dumb coach pitch reference, and I apologize if this gets on your nerves. I get it. But this is just my thinking, right? Had coached a kid, all-star team, just a head taller than everybody else, and not one of those kids that his hand-eye coordination hasn't caught up with him. He's good. But he just moves a little differently than everybody else, and I think a lot of it is because of his physical development is past other kids. So I think he comes across, I think we have, as coaches and adults maybe, a smaller window for allowing him to either make mistakes, or I know it was criticized by fellow coaches and parents for not giving the effort that other kids gave. And at certain times, it's absolutely true. But I kept going in my head, like, is that really the case, or is it just that much more wildly apparent because he's that much bigger than everybody else? He's just easier to see, and he makes plays that other kids don't make at this age level. And I think the same thing goes when you're 6'4", 325 in high school. It is clear to see exactly what you're doing every single play, and you're going to get scrutinized. And we saw it with Clowney, right, at Carolina, because he was just head and shoulders still that much better than everybody else. So if there was any play ever where it looked like he wasn't given 1,000%, then ESPN was going to edit those plays together and this just happened to be the game after the hit, right, against North Carolina in the season opener. So that became part of the narrative. Like, is Clowney giving 100% all the time? And he's got a next level. If he's going to the next level, the effort has to improve. Okay, Craig, I hear you. The effort will really have to ramp up at the next level, he says, from what I heard from a coach who saw him taking plays off and not playing with full effort. I think that can be overblown. There could be that could be a dead-on scouting evaluation, but I don't think that's a fair one necessarily. I think that's where a lot of good players get to in high school as well, is that you want to, and that is one of the things that definitely turns me off in the recruiting game. And we see it all the time for college players going to the NFL in the scouting report, right? He doesn't do this or he doesn't do that. We just nitpick our way from and get away from actually, no, this is why he's even been talked about in the first place, because he does these things really, really, really well. And compared to not doing everything 100% perfectly, it's kind of ridiculous. Craig says, but you got to get him. And that's maybe another reason, maybe that exact point is why I'm saying perception here is much bigger than reality. 4-star defensive lineman, massive kid, good player, already come out and said home state schools got the advantage. You're already sitting number 21 in the country with 7 4-star guys committed. You got to have this guy. In my opinion, the most important commit of the Shane Beamer era. Big picture wise. You want to go more zoned in? I mean, that's really easy. You just say Spencer Rattler is the most important guy. Instant credibility, notoriety, somewhere in there. I'm not sure exactly the word. Relevance. It's probably the word, right? Instant relevance in college football this year, 2022, for Shane Beamer and company, with Spencer Rattler playing quarterback. But talking about a high school recruit, I think this is it. You point right to this one. And again, unfortunately, just because of the factors that I mentioned, I think has the potential to be much more damaging than it does program building, if that makes sense. That's reality. Because if he decides to go somewhere else, start thinking, why? Why would he do that? And I think it's only natural for other players that are already committed to wonder the same thing and start to have that in their thought process, as opposed to turn around the narrative just here in the last week or so, where a couple of guys that were in position to commit to Carolina did not. If you have a guy with this much attention and this many factors in your favor make that decision as well, then perception can be tough. Chris asked on the Facebook live stream, wasn't Clowney named the number 2 SEC player of all time? Sorry if you've already talked about that. Was on a call. I think you might be thinking of the 30 best players now 30 years into the SEC of Gamecock football, that list that 1075 The Game did recently, and he got named number 2. Clowney did. I think Alshon Jeffrey won the fan vote for number 1. I would flip those for sure and have Clowney number 1. Craig says if we snag Harbor, he will be the biggest get for Beamer, just as far as ranking. I think you're talking about the 5-star guy from the DC area. I've seen this guy popping up on my social media feed. Again, not the recruiting nerd. York says, can't figure out why some take a snapshot of a guy and say that it is for the next 4 years without taking into consideration growth. Well, York, that wouldn't be just a snapshot of a guy, right? I mean, you can have a reputation for being extremely talented and yet clearly not giving 100% effort all the time. And you can earn that reputation. I'm not saying, I don't know, I haven't seen the kid play. But you also get certain guys, certain coaches who like to just to be that guy, right? Say, man, I saw a couple of plays and I don't know. Well, what about the 50 other plays, right? So I'm fascinated to see how this works out. Not just what the decision is, but again, how it's made. Because that's why I'll give Pup Howard again. I think it's worth pointing out the guy who over the weekend, when another Florida guy commits to Florida over South Carolina, when a guy has flipped recently from the South Carolina class to Florida, and when you're in Jacksonville in the state of Florida, clearly people are coming at him, right? If not the coaching staff from Florida coming at him, which I'm sure they are. To put out a tweet about loyalty, kind of reaffirm that he's a South Carolina guy, was exactly what South Carolina fans want to hear, want to see. But from how I saw him do his commitment, the video that was put out, that he put out and narrated himself and didn't make it all about himself or his high school highlights or the whole thing. It was more about what South Carolina was building and how he wanted to be a part of that. And what I saw in that video was helping to sell the South Carolina program much more than he was selling or celebrating himself. And I don't even think I put it into those words at the time, and it might not have even dawned on me at the time that he made the video. I just mentioned that if I was an advisor out there, that I would advise announcing your commitment and doing a commitment video almost exactly. The blueprint of it would be what Pup Howard did. So it doesn't surprise me now to see this a few months later, I think, at least 6 weeks later, something like that, to see Howard kind of backing that up or almost just adding another building block to what he already has put out there. It's going to be fascinating to see what Mcleod does here, how he does it. Is it going to be, I mean, first of all, he's announcing it live at his football stadium, 5 o'clock on Thursday. 5 o'clock on a Thursday is a pretty newsworthy time, let's say. If you want some attention and you want some news coverage, I'm guessing Mcleod has been advised that Thursday at 5 o'clock is a pretty good time to do that. You want to honor your high school program, you do it at your high school stadium. That's part of it as well. So these are all the factors going into this thing that, again, help make SEC football so fascinating, so entertaining for all of us. Because we're sitting here as preseason camp is about to turn into preseason camp, man. Camp that most players hate, if they're going to be honest with you, right? Or I should say, that is amongst the least favorite of things to do when you're a college football player. It's when you've already been working out all summer. Now you've got more than a handful of practices under your belt. You got a scrimmage under your belt. looking to do that about a week more until you turn the page and actually start more of the fun stuff, preparing for an opponent, getting ready for a game. So we have that environment, that atmosphere around preseason practice right now, and yet you still got these recruiting battles going on and the kind of the behind the scenes or off the field stories being played out, being written. And it's a big one for South Carolina. And again, I think it's the biggest one that we've seen from the perception of the program. You get this commitment, your program is strong. You forget quickly, a lot like that Troy game, right? Easy to overlook. Kelby Collins going to Florida. He's from Florida, right? It's no big deal at all. Easy to forget about the wide receiver up in Virginia going to Penn State. Penn State's great football tradition, right? Can't blame a guy for going up there. South Carolina doesn't play Penn State. Good luck, Carmelo Taylor, right? You get McLeod 30 minutes down the road, committing to the home state program, joining Marquis Anderson, Monteque Rames as in-state 4-star guys. You're pretty much batting 1,000 there, in-state, big-time guys. Continuing to add to that narrative of the last time Shane Beamer was in town, how he built off of the big-time in-state prospects and how that laid the foundation for massive success. You get this guy, then you are a 5-star guy up in the DMV that's already had from the D.C., Maryland, Virginia area, a bunch of guys migrating down, making their decision. Certainly knowing the Frank Beamer legacy at Virginia Tech and Shane Beamer's reputation of working for him there, recruiting there. You look down and say, oh, another 4-star guy, huh? South Carolina making more moves in recruiting, continuing to be nationally relevant, can go down there, be a part of an SEC program, and be massively appreciated for it. Fascinating to keep an eye on for sure. Again, Thursday, 5 o'clock, out at Camden, big time recruiting announcement for Shane Beamer's program and the perception of it. Again, I think you are strong. You are strong to very strong as an SEC program. You get this commitment. You don't. And again, the perception of it is, maybe there are a few cracks here. Maybe there's something that we're not seeing. Why couldn't they make that happen when they had a bunch of factors in their favor? Perception bigger than reality here when it comes to this commitment from Xavier Mcleod, 5 o'clock, Camden High School this week. And probably right now, perception bigger than reality here too, just based off of the first scrimmage over the weekend. When you see the headline, running backs Marshawn Lloyd and Christian Beal-Smith, who I assume will be kind of 1A and 1B. I guess Juju McDowell certainly factors in there. And so maybe that's not quite fair. But it seems like Lloyd's going to be the guy. Beal-Smith can be a short yardage type guy, power guy. Juju McDowell more the change-up guy. That's how I see the running back rotation right now from the Gamecock perspective. How the transfer in from Columbia, Little Turbo is the nickname. I think it's Dante Miller, right? How he can factor in, if at all, will be interesting to see. But you had Marshawn Lloyd, Christian Beal-Smith, then wide receiver number 1 and Josh Vann. Corey Rucker, big-time transfer in from Arkansas State as a wide receiver. And then linebacker Sherrod Green, all out of scrimmage number 1. Notable, for sure. Shane Beamer saying that they'll be back pretty soon. Nothing serious. Also notable. And now it'll be a matter of, okay, when do you hear that these guys were back 100%? Because you're never going to get the full story about injuries, especially in the middle of August from college football coaches. You're just not. And I think Shane Beamer has already shown us he's going to be optimistic. He was very optimistic this time last year. It was exactly this time, right? After the first scrimmage that we heard Luke Doty had a major injury. And then it was, he's going to be working to get back, and we're hearing he could be ready early on in the season, but we're going to have get other guys ready to go. And Doty was clearly never back to anywhere close to 100%, and that injury kept him from having any kind of success. But it was always talked about optimistically by Shane Beamer, which is kind of who he is, which is how he runs his program, which is where most college football coaches are. Their headspace is about injuries and how they're going to talk about them. Then I feel like it's my job to separate some fact versus fiction if it comes to just the nature of an injury, right? And the likelihood of players returning. And to get a more realistic perspective maybe than what a head coach feels like he wants or needs to present. But in this case, it doesn't apply, at least not yet, right? Sit out the first scrimmage, hear from the head coach that it's only minor foot, leg stuff. Those guys are going to be back, if not today, then midweek. Then there's no concern. No major concern, I should say. But I think just at all, that the fact that they didn't play at all is enough cause for some concern for most fans out there. Something to keep an eye on is all. Because of, two, who these guys are, where they play, and how important they're projected to be in 2022. Lloyd and Beal Smith at running back, a massive position of importance. And you're going to have injuries at running back. You just are. In the SEC in 2022, Tank Bigsby has been pretty reliable, I think, from a health standpoint. I think maybe one of the most, if not the most, in the SEC. Of a workhorse type back who's been able to do it nearly game in and game out. Lloyd's the exact opposite, right? Unfortunately for him, having come to Carolina and suffered the major knee injury in practice number 3, preseason camp, true freshman. And then last year, pretty reliable from an injury standpoint, but just had not gotten 100% back from that knee. And now the story goes that, threw away the knee braces, went and put them in his closet. He's ready to go, ready to have that breakout year that he was poised to have coming in as a true freshman, derailed by injury. Josh Vann and Corey Rucker. Vann, what he did last year with a massive improvement. We talked about that. Was that last Thursday? Focusing on the wide receiver position. We mentioned Corey Rucker very significantly in that conversation as well. I think that's a fair way to put it. Chris, not freaking out because we've got depth, concerned, but not freaking out. It was as doom and gloom this time last year. As doom and gloom as it is right now, I don't think there's any doom and gloom. I think it was rightly a high level of concern with your. I think he was the unquestioned leader of the team this time last year, Luke Doty, right? He was the guy. You were putting him out front and center. Well-spoken kid. Leadership qualities off the charts and the whole thing. Great worker and loves the Gamecocks. Tremendous athlete. You got to remember the environment at the time. And then Luke Doty is hurt. And what do you got behind him, man? The transfer from St. Francis and Jason Brown that hadn't earned the trust with the coaching staff. And then you got Zeb Nolan in the mix, and Colton Gauthier still hasn't worked his way into significant playing time. Now to have Shane Beamer talking about Luke Doty over the weekend, coming off of scrimmage number 1, I should say, talking about how impressive he's been and both on the field and off it, but in clearly the backup quarterback role, right? I think we all think there is a pretty massive gap between Spencer Rattler, a guy who was the preseason Heisman Trophy favorite this time last year, and Luke Doty. But it's what I would want in my football program. A clear starting quarterback and a clear backup quarterback who will be the next in line. That, to me, is the ideal situation. Then you got a couple of talented guys in as true freshmen. Another guy in, I think, headed into, I guess, just the second full year of the program in Gauthier. To me, that's what you want. And then throw in Dakarrion Joyner, and I mix Doty in there a little bit too, just because of their athleticism. You got some options there. It's a fantastic situation, I feel like, on paper. Now you got to get Rattler and Satterfield, Marcus Satterfield, the offensive coordinator, in sync. And then you got to put all the other pieces together in sync, especially a lot of those pieces that haven't played together from the skill position standpoint. Austin Stogner, another transfer in from Oklahoma at tight end. How is he going to factor in and complement Jaheim Bell, who last we saw was just lighting North Carolina up and on his way to some preseason All-American lists, certainly all-conference lists, and some high NFL projection lists. Then you got Van on the outside, big-time season last year, massive improvement. What do we hear about Xavier Mcleod, Amarion Brown, off of scrimmage number 1, stepping up, making their case for playing time. Juice Wells you got coming off of the transfer portal, as well as Rucker. Corey Rucker from Arkansas State and Wells from James Madison, expected to be guys you can count on and productive wide receivers, taking the offense to another level, certainly giving them more options. But you got a lot of pieces to put together in the puzzle. And this is the time of year where you're figuring out, all right, what are those best pieces we can count on? What's going to be the identity, right? G.A. Mangus, the former Carolina quarterbacks coach, passing game coordinator. What are you going to major in? Because I think it's very fair to say we don't know what South Carolina is going to major in this year. I think the offensive line and how productive they are will be a big part of that, right? Are they going to be the run blocking 1,000-yard rusher in 10 SEC games unit that we saw in 2020? Or are they going to be more like last year's, where clearly the offensive identity had changed and whatever they were trying to do to run the football wasn't very successful consistently? But there was the Florida game where you had two guys run for more than 100 yards, right? There was a North Carolina game where seemingly the offense could almost do whatever it wanted. So there are examples, both pro and con, for sure. Craig, Rat and Sat 2022, make the shirts. Not a merch guy. Having Rattler probably going to make Doty better. Joyner too. Well, if it doesn't, there's a big problem, Roger. Having Rattler better make Luke Doty better. It better make Dakarrion Joyner better. That's what good players do. They make other players better. But I think it's even more significant from Luke Doty's standpoint. And this is my explanation for why, a big reason why South Carolina hasn't had a quarterback drafted in the NFL since 1989 is, by and large, most guys haven't been ready to play quarterback in the SEC when they've been put on the field. I'll never forget, it was Dan Mullen talking about quarterbacks and their development, and this was about Emory Jones possibly getting on the field early on in his career and how many snaps he was getting in the whole thing. And he was behind Felipe Franks, who's now apparently going to play tight end in the NFL, by the way. think for the Falcons, if I'm not mistaken. But this was even going in, it was the week of Carolina and Florida. I think I remember hearing him talk about it in a press conference, just saying, well, you got to talk about what's fair to a quarterback. What is fair? It's not fair to put a guy on the field who's not ready. And I think Dan Mullen is a great evaluator of being ready to play college football at the quarterback position. Not a great, maybe not a great guy in 2022 to run your program and deal with NIL and recruiting and the whole thing, especially at Florida. We saw that. But still, a really good evaluator of the quarterback position in college football and being ready to play. And I think if we got all these quarterbacks from the Carolina perspective over the last several years, over the last, I don't know, several decades even, and if we talk to them about what that means to them, it would be fascinating discussion to hear, right? Because what's fair? Because when you're a player, you just want to play. You think it's unfair if you can't play, I think, a lot of times. But when you're a quarterback, it's a different deal. And if you're going out there and you, like, talked to Perry Orth about it one time, about the end of his career, I think, that last season when he would go to the line of scrimmage and he wasn't allowed to audible because it was a new system under Will Muschamp and Kurt Roper. And they just didn't give him that flexibility. And he said, I asked him to give a percentage time, how many times he would go to the line of scrimmage and just know or think that the play didn't have much of a chance to be successful. And I think he put like 65% on it. So to me, and Perry was much more prepared at that point, having been, I think, a fifth-year senior, than most, if not all, Carolina quarterbacks have been recently, where guys just are, if not a true freshman, redshirt freshman, or, I mean, most of the guys had played significant snaps as freshmen. And I think we've seen the results of that, right? It hadn't worked out well. Connor Shaw got a chance to sit and learn. And beat out Steven Garcia to start the 2010 season, I think it was. That was that East Carolina game up in Charlotte where he plays the first quarter. It doesn't go well, and then Garcia comes in and looks like a Heisman Trophy-like guy. Carolina scores 56 points, I think, that game. All of them second quarter on, I think. Maybe they got a field goal under Connor Shaw. I remember him getting his helmet knocked off. I thought his head was attached. Fortunately, it wasn't. But then Shaw sits the rest of that year. And then several games into the next year before Garcia's kicked out off the team, I think, right? And then you get the Connor Shaw era. He was ready. And he didn't have to go out on the field and suffer more of those hits like he did in that first quarter in the East Carolina game. And what I think presumably would have been less than stellar success, maybe more interceptions, more whatever it is, sputtering drives, and your confidence continues to take a hit and a hit and a hit. Another line that I'll never forget Perry Orth telling me is just how important confidence is as a quarterback. 90%, I think he put it up there. That's most of it. You got to know you can make the play, not think the play is going to work. You got to know you can make the play. And so now to have Spencer Rattler, who is not short on confidence and has the ability to back that up. You got him solidified as your starter, and you got Luke Doty, clearly a very talented guy, but a guy also who clearly, from how I saw it at the end of that 2020 season, was not ready to play, was not ready to be a quarterback, was asked to go out there and make stuff happen because the other quarterback just wasn't mobile enough to do that. The offensive line wasn't good enough to give you consistent time. So good luck. This is the best chance the offense had. You go out there and make something happen. A lot like Lorenzo Nunez at the end of the Steve Spurrier era, right? Maybe you can go make it happen. And then clearly Spurrier looked himself in the mirror and said, nope, I don't know what's going on here. Exactly, Chris. So you're saying you got to be cocky to be a Gamecock quarterback. No, you got to be cocky to be a quarterback at any level. Burt Reynolds called it the quarterback walk, and how like big time A-list actors even have that quarterback walk, I think is how he put it. And being a former Florida State player himself, give Burt Reynolds credit on that one for knowing it. You got to have the quarterback walk. And that's the tough part as well. Anyone who gets to an SEC program as a recruited quarterback or even preferred walk-on or whatever, you've had success. You got the quarterback walk and swagger to some degree. You had to. Now it's got to go to a different level where I think it's probably more important to have the preparation part of it because you already have the physical skills. Now your mind has to get to the point where you understand the game, you understand what the offense is asking of you, you understand what your coaching staff is asking from you. That has to be there to get you that next level of quarterback confidence. That's, to me, the difference that I saw between Connor Shaw in that first start and then Connor Shaw when he got his first SEC start, I think it was against Kentucky, middle of the next season, and absolutely lit things up. And it didn't really slow down. Not slow down a little bit. I think they scored 50 points that game. He set the record for touchdown passes maybe in an SEC game for South Carolina. It definitely slowed down, but it kept going from there, maybe is the best way to put that. And that's the part that has clearly been lacking. That's what Zeb Nolan had, right? He just didn't quite have the physical skills to go with it. He knew exactly what the offense, how things were set up, and what check to make. It was just a matter of making plays. Also having the weapons on the outside to do it too. But that's why Zeb Nolan got playing time. That's why he was the starting quarterback for Carolina last year for most of the season. Because he had the mental side of it. He had been developed for so many years and in so many different ways. And Roger's trying to go back through the archives and think of just Gamecock quarterbacks even before Todd Ellis who were drafted as quarterbacks, and using Dan Reeves drafted as a running back, really. So, yeah, can't think of many others. And that's been a real anomaly, I think, for the Gamecock football program, especially now that you've seen Deshaun Watson and Trevor Lawrence roll through Clemson. I think that the current situation at quarterback is much more relatable to Gamecock fans than what Clemson fans have gotten used to through the years. I mean, even Charlie Whitehurst had a really long NFL career. Taj Boyd drafted in the NFL, even though it didn't work out. But the DJU situation coming in as a big-time quarterback, showing why that was in a couple of games, filling in for Trevor Lawrence, and then it's your turn, it's your program not being able to live up to the massive expectation. Boy, that's South Carolina football in a nutshell, isn't it? In a lot of ways. Being a big-time, talented high school prospect, coming in, playing early, and it not going well. That's just what it has been, and I think that's certainly the path that Luke Doty was on. I mean, let's be honest. Had Luke Doty played all of last season, would the offense have looked that much better? I find it hard to believe. I think we would have seen maybe more big plays from a quarterback run perspective if Doty was 100% healthy. maybe a slightly more consistent offense, having the same guy back there, and Marcus Satterfield getting a good feel for what his young quarterback could do on the field, and what he could handle going into the game, what kind of options to give him. But I don't think, instead of 100-plus total offense, maybe you get to 80, 75, right? I think that was kind of the ceiling for last year's offense. This year, the ceiling seems so much higher for Gamecock football, especially on the offensive side of the ball. And I think we need to be careful about that too, because you guys have heard it. If you've listened to anybody talk about South Carolina football in the last several months, it's that old cliche that you can have a better team and not have a better record. It's absolutely true. And I think that's when you got to point out on the defensive side of the ball how many turnovers Carolina forced last year and how that directly related to winning some of those ugly games. East Carolina, Troy, Vandy. Had that not have happened, that record and the narrative for Gamecock football is a lot different. But it did happen, right? And so, specifically on the offensive side of the ball, looking at Spencer Rattler, experienced and talented, was able to get on the field early in full year number 2 there after watching Jalen Hurts do it at Oklahoma, having been the next in line, right? After Kyler Murray, after Baker Mayfield, playing for, I don't think it's even close, right? The most consistent top line college football program offensively recently. I'm trying to think. Yeah, Alabama's been really, really good, but they've done it with different offensive coordinators rolling through there. So I think Lincoln Riley's at the top of the list. That's why Southern Cal is getting the preseason hype they are, and Caleb Williams specifically. Jordan Addison certainly helps. But having seen that, having groomed in that system, having performed to the level he's performed at, and I know that meant getting benched as well, but it's also 15-0 in the last 15 starts. So having all of that bringing to the quarterback position for Carolina football this year for Luke Doty to watch, to see, to relate to and with, to learn from. To me, that's got to be a really good situation, assuming Doty is taking it from the patient perspective. I would think, if I'm Luke Doty, I'm thinking Spencer Rattler is coming in for this year to play at a very high level and then move on to the NFL. I think technically he's got 2 years left, but this year, play well, move on, right? That you only have to sit out 1 year, and even in doing so, you're a play away from being the guy. And if it actually goes well, even as the backup quarterback, you're going to see some time on the football field. I think that is a massively optimistic take from Chris. I think Spencer Rattler getting benched helped him more than hurt him. I get it. We'll see overall, but it's hard for me to ignore 3 previous Heisman Trophy finalists playing the position at that school before him and thinking that getting benched there helps you in the long run more than it hurts you. It's a long road back to a Heisman Trophy finalist right now for Spencer Rattler. Love to see it. Don't get me wrong. I know all of you would as well. And loved hanging out with you guys today. Roger says, y'all have a great day. Enjoy the show as always. Oh, definitely humbled him, but we'll see whether it helped him more than hurt him. And like Baker Mayfield maybe was humbled before then, having gone to Texas Tech and transferred and kind of battled his way into the position, whereas Spencer Rattler came in as a number 1 guy in the country and had to wait 1 year, and that was all. So maybe you're right, Chris. But I think this season will tell for sure. And we'll know pretty quickly, I feel like, with game number 1. Georgia State, less than 3 weeks away now. Love where we're at in the calendar. Love talking football with you today. Thanks for hanging out with us, all you guys, especially those participating on the live chat. Much appreciated. We'll do it again tomorrow. Probably the plan is to get some consistent guests per day here going through football season, so we can all, like, we're just getting in the schedule around my house of school starting today, so we'll probably start to schedule some other stuff here as I get in that mindset. Thank you guys for having me in a great mindset today. Enjoyed it. Easy Jason, he says, Tim Hill, the best morning sports show. Let's at least just call it Unrestricted Free Agent. I just had to put my name on this thing just to make it unique from a show title standpoint. But appreciate the kind words. That'll do it for this edition, the August 15th edition, Unrestricted Free Agent. Talk to you again tomorrow.